Hi, I'm Richard Davies, host of the podcast How Do We Fix It?, where we report on the people, projects, and ideas of braver angels. Listen and subscribe to our shows wherever you get your podcasts. So far, we've recorded more than 36 episodes, all about braver angels. Most are less than 30 minutes long. Again, our podcast is How Do We Fix It?, and our website is howdowefixit.me.
Picture an Instant Pot. It's got one job, besides cooking, of course. Letting off steam without blowing up in your face. My guest today says most of us never learn to do that in our relationships. We just hold it until we explode, or we go quiet and let it eat at us. Kelsey Blahnik has spent her career teaching people another way, the and way. Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate the Hate podcast. I'm your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. The Derate the Hate podcast is proudly produced in collaboration with Braver Angels, America's largest grassroots, cross-partisan organization working towards civic renewal. This podcast amplifies the mission that we share to foster a more respectful and united America where civic friendship thrives even when we disagree. Each week, through the power of story, conversation, and connection with incredible guests, we work to build bridges instead of barriers. Not to change minds on the issues, but to change how we see one another when we differ. Because, friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, share it with a friend, and visit braverangels.org to learn how you can get involved in the movement to bridge the partisan divide. Friends, I am so incredibly grateful that you have joined me for another powerful Derate the Hate episode. So let's get to it. Kelsey Blahnik is a therapist and social worker who's lived all over the map, literally. Red places, blue places, purple places, and she found good people everywhere she landed. That's not naive optimism. It's years of sitting with clients from every political conviction, listening to what actually drives them. Then the pandemic hit, and the divide she navigated professionally started showing up in her personal life. So she wrote it down. The book is called The And Way, Assertive Peacemaking in a Divided World, and it's built on an idea I hadn't heard framed quite this way before. That peace doesn't mean an absence of conflict. It means learning to have the hard conversation instead of avoiding it. Kelsey's also been part of the Braver Angels world since 2019, so she gets exactly what we're trying to do here. Today, we're talking about the real difference between being assertive and being aggressive, why bottling things up eventually costs you the relationship, and how looking at yourself with a little more compassion might be the first step towards looking at everyone else that way too. Let's get into it with my friend, Kelsey Blahnik. Here we go. Kelsey Blahnik, welcome to the Derate the Hate podcast. It's great to see you today.
It's great to see you.
I'm looking forward to hearing about this book. You'd reached out to us here at Braver Angels to talk a little bit about this book, and then you sent me the book, and I've been looking at it a bit, and very excited. So the book is The And Way, Assertive Peacemaking in a Divided World. And Kelsey, my first question is what in your story, how did you come to the point where you're like, I need to write this book?
I have moved all over the country and I've lived in red places and predominantly blue places and purple places. And I've found good people in all of those places. And so I've always known and loved people on on all parts of the political spectrum, and have been serving as a social worker with a lot of different people with a lot of different convictions. And because of all those unique relationships, I was especially convicted in during the pandemic by how divided things continue to feel, and how uncomfortable that was to navigate in my personal and professional life. And so I wrote this book to really teach people some skills that allowed me to still maintain relationships professionally and personally with folks that had held different convictions than me. And I wanted it for my kids and for my clients and anybody who is able to benefit from it.
So the social work is what I guess the social work and having and dealing with all the different people and seeing all the, well, like you said, you know people on the blue side of the spectrum, the red side of the spectrum, everywhere on all points in between, and how they relate to each other, and then how you have to relate to them as a social worker. What is, when I start thinking about peacemaking and how we do this, and this is the and way thing that I'm trying to get here, Kelsey, and is, what does assertive peacemaking mean? I've never heard it put that way, so I'm trying to get my mind around the social work part and how assertive peacemaking kind of comes into that.
So peacemaking to me and being assertive is finding a place where we can actually have uncomfortable conversations and address things head on, rather than avoiding the tough topics and looking at peace from an absence of conflict point of view. I look at our need for being more assertive, not just on politics, but across the board, that if we could operate in a more assertive way with one another throughout our daily lives, then there wouldn't be so much less left to passive aggressiveness, and there wouldn't be so much left to make assumptions about one another, that we would have so much more clarity to move through the world with. And we could be curious with one another and actually get real answers from each other too.
And I think that's important because, real life is just not absent of conflict, right? And that's one of the things that always strikes me as odd when people start talking about the bridge building space or whatever, and they've just never been in it, and they're like, oh, you guys are just trying to avoid all conflict and make everybody, bring together people in these kumbaya moments and things like that. And I said, I'm like, no, that's completely opposite of what we do. It's not about avoiding conflict, but it's about how do we better navigate the conflict, better work through our issues together. I think, what you just said there is I think hugely important, is it leaves less to that kind of passive aggressive thing, right? And when people feel like they're not really allowed to get in there, it kind of makes them ornery.
Absolutely. I talk often about us being like instant pots, where if you're full of steam and all this resentment or anger, that if you just try and take the lid off and you just all of a sudden talk about something uncomfortable, the likelihood of the explosion is high, because you're just going to kind of take that pendulum swing to the other end. If you're passive over and over and over and holding it all in, and the second you unleash, it's going to feel like an explosion. I'm hoping to get to the place where, and I feel like personally I've gotten more careful about trying to vent some of that steam over time so it's not an explosion. And that venting allows me to feel more connected to people. That's intimacy.
Yeah. That's a great analogy, the Instant Pot. I think that's the most used appliance that we have in our kitchen, and it's a very good thing it has that little lock safety function on it, right? Because what you're saying, I'm just thinking about different ways that this analogy plays out, because it's hugely important, like you said. Any receptacle, if you get too much steam, if you're not letting it off in the right way, it's going to explode. And I think what I hear you saying is, if you're not doing this in the right way, and I think this is what becomes important, with organizations like the one I work for, Braver Angels, and the work you're doing with the Andway therapy and things like that. You provide like this structured space, and things are set up to work in the right way, so that it's not just this big combustion chamber that's going to blow apart when it finally reaches that tipping point, right? But it works in a way that, much like an Instant Pot has that little safety mechanism, and then the little valve where you release the steam and everything else. The structures that we operate in bring people together that might otherwise just tear each other apart in an unstructured way, but we provide a space in which people can almost say, okay, I'm here, I've got this that's completely different. I'm here, I've got this that's completely different. If we come together in a structured way, we can probably do something together in this structure that we could never do in an unstructured way.
Yes, absolutely. That's why I've always loved what Braver Angels is doing. I've been engaging in workshops since 2019. And I'm such a fan of the work you guys do, because it is all about making this conflict more productive and effective, rather than thinking of how can we keep the lid on tighter. We're just looking at ways of venting in a productive way.
Mm-hmm. So tell me then about how this has played out for you, Kelsey, in the social work space and the and way. What would you say is different about what you're doing than what your typical everyday social worker throughout the space? Talk to me about that.
Yes, exactly. So in terms of relationships, when I'm working with couples or when I'm working with individuals and they're in all these relationships and I'm supporting them as they're navigating how they're going to handle those conflicts, one thing that's, I think, a little different than what the general therapy speak around conflict is that I'm not encouraging folks to siphon off and isolate and use that overly used term boundaries to say, I need to boundary myself, protect my peace, to such an extreme where it's all individualistic. And I don't think we need to go to the extreme where there's no sense of boundaries and just throwing yourself into relationships and putting up with anything that the other person does either. There's this give and take of requesting, putting out requests in a relationship for what you want the other person to know that you're going to need in order to feel safe and comfortable staying in relationship or having a deeper and deeper relationship. And then there's also boundarying around, when somebody doesn't meet that request, how far back you're going to pull, or what degree of relationship you really want to have, how much time you really want to spend with that person, that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing in relationships. We're either best friends or we spend every week together, or we are cutting them out of our lives altogether. So that's a big part of that on a relational standpoint. And then I work primarily with OCD and trauma. And so I'm in the same way, I'm just all about building psychological flexibility. That's my passion. That's what I believe is going to be a major way of us trying to confront violence and confront all this division, is having more flexibility in the way that we're not only looking at other people, how we're looking at ourselves. Like I'm a human being in progress. I've got all these competing impulses within me. And so my book is mostly about the first more than half is about that internal work of how do I look at myself with compassion, knowing I have all these competing impulses. I'm not all one way. I'm not maybe all red or all blue either. I've got all these competing impulses within me. Then it allows me to have more of that compassion when I'm looking outward at other people.
Yeah. And this is hugely important. And I'm glad you brought that up, because this is, I'm going to say it's very much part of my story, but it's also part of, we all have stories, right? The power of storytelling is a huge part of the thing, but recognizing your own story and then working through your own issues. Like you said, you work with trauma survivors and people who, OCD, trauma survivors, veterans, folks like that have all seen these things. But if we want to if we want to be better for the world and present a positive impact on the world, a lot of times we have to go back to our own story and start working through those things, because we cannot be a light for the world if our own light is not shining bright, right? I think that's how I wanted to say that. But the reality is like, I use my own story, Kelsey, and you can tell me if this is what I heard you saying. I use a lot of my own story. Like I talk about all my anger and animus and things growing up, and how I went on this personal mindset journey because I knew I couldn't be the right person for the world that I lived in without first working on me and overcoming a lot of the things that I've experienced over the course of my life. Is that kind of what you're talking about here in terms of, working with people and helping them work through their past so that they can get to a brighter future?
Yes, I think a lot of conflict resolution models and books and talks focus a lot on, here are the strategies you can use when you're in that conflict. And my book and my work is a lot about how can you find that regulation internally so that when you approach the conflict, you're prepared to, and you're self-aware enough to be able to engage in a more productive way. Just getting thrown in there, it can very easily activate these protective instincts in you to get aggressive or to shut down, to pull back. And knowing more about yourself and sometimes why that's there, but also how you want to, present in the world. Like you said, that you've, made this journey toward wanting to be a light. For you, that's the value that you're after, is wanting to be a light in the world. Then that allows you to show up in a way that's going to be way more productive. That's going to allow you to vent instead of explode.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We've forgotten what it feels like to have a real conversation. Social media algorithms and comment sections reward outrage over understanding. It's time to escape the feed. The week of August 10th, join all sides for a live conversation about the American dream, how we're thinking about it, and navigating the challenges. With a format designed to foster respectful dialogue, you'll hear perspectives you won't find in your feed. Your insights will be anonymized and included in a report to help leaders better understand how people see this issue. No hot takes, just real ones. Sign up today at allsides.com/derate-hate. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I've met so many people in my journey, Kelsey, and I'm sure you have too, who you're like, this person has so much to give and so much greatness there. If it wasn't just for, that temper, that's what it was in my case, is I just had this horrible temper. But if it wasn't for that temper or that passive aggressive nature, the way that they're interacting with people, or, different things. And it's like, boy, I'd love to be able to help all these people find that same thing. I for me, it was, I described it the other day, Kelsey, as, looking back on it now, it was kind of like this prison that I had put myself in because of all the ugliness of my past and allowing things that I had no control over to kind of control me. And I'm sure you've seen it too. And I think we've all seen people that we really care about that, they just allow things outside of their control, things from their past, to kind of dictate their future. And it's like, I want to just help them unlock those chains that they're stuck in.
Yes. And a big part of psychological flexibility is not matching the way things have been is the way things have to be. Being able to find more options, brainstorm and be more flexible to consider the way things have been isn't necessarily the way things are going to go. Something new can happen. And that goes with conflict, expecting, I already know how she's going to take it if I bring that topic up with her. Anticipating that allows us to shut down and maybe not venture into curious territory. And so whenever we anticipate that something could go differently than it did before, like I can consider myself a a human being in progress that's messy and never changing. If I can look at other people that way too, then I'm going to be more willing to at least attempt hard conversations.
That's right. This goes back to the assertive, peacemaking versus kind of passive peacemaking is how do we unlock that for people? I'm sure you can give me an example of somebody or a story of how you've been able to see that aha moment in somebody, that when you take them from that I guess passive peacemaking to assertive peacemaking, and how that prompts or elicits that curiosity within a person.
Yes, yes. Because I do think the idea of being assertive is this space in between the extremes of passive and aggressive, like way on opposite ends, as I'm holding my hands out on opposite sides of the room. I think there's a lot of emphasis on trying to get aggressive quieter, or kind of getting aggressive more assertive. And there's all these keyboard warriors out there online that seem really loud. Those are the loudest folks, and sometimes we think they're the majority when they're just the loudest. I have, my work is speaking to both ends, but I am really emphasizing on that passive side. How can, you amplify your voice so that we know those are just some of the loudest voices. Those aren't the only voices out there. There are a lot of people that are holding convictions and just not speaking up about them. And so some of the ways that I encourage people to go from a passive to a more assertive and clear stance is first focusing on being able to identify what they want. I think a lot of times people aren't expressing because they've not actually practiced identifying that within themselves first. And so practicing not just how I feel. I think we've gotten a lot better at that culturally, about putting out a complaint even. I don't like that. And instead focusing on requests. Here's what I do want. And practicing that skill is really critical in a relationship, being able to say, whenever you bring up this topic, I want us to be able to have this conversation in a more, at this volume, or I would really love for us to have this conversation for a certain period of time. And then could we spend the rest of the day, just having our Thanksgiving dinner or whatever, being able to set some sort of limits and boundaries to the way that you want the dynamic to flow has to come from even knowing what you want out of it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people just know, I don't like this, but they don't know what they're actually looking for in a relationship. Yeah. Being able to identify it and then express it is what we practice.
Yeah. I think that's hugely important, whether it be individual or a movement in general. When you focus constantly on what you don't want or what you don't like, it's almost like it's doomed to fail. But if you can talk about what you are for and where you want to get to, I think you have a much greater likelihood of success, because that's hugely important. Another thing that you mentioned there, Kelsey, that I want to step back to a little bit, because I mean, I don't know if this is as prevalent as I think it might be, but I think there are a lot of people right now that don't understand the difference between aggressiveness and assertiveness. Yeah. Because I think that's a big point that I want to key on here, because aggressiveness and assertiveness, two very different things in my book. And when people confuse the two, it's like shooting yourself in the foot, right? You think you're being assertive, but you're actually being aggressive. And when you are aggressive, especially in terms of having a conversation with somebody you disagree with, or you're trying to work through some type of conflict. Assertiveness, I think, is good. Aggressiveness, very bad. People's ears slam shut. Not so good. Talk to me about that dynamic, because there's something there that is very, very important, and I want to key on it.
Yes, absolutely. The difference can show up very differently between every individual and every cultural context. So what can come across as aggressive to one person can be experienced by somebody else very differently. I would say, generally speaking, an increase in volume, the tone that's being used, the you use, the pointing, their gesture, hand gestures and stance, posture, that can all influence a more aggressive state. And when I'm thinking of assertive, it's all about being clear. And I come back to those two critical things. It's I feel, I want. So there's a vulnerability to it. It's not just what you should do. That goes into aggressive. This is, I'm communicating what I feel and what I want, and I'm doing it clearly as often as possible, trying to keep that tone more respectful and engaged. And I do want to give the caveat, I don't think that assertive communication is the only allowed or appropriate form at all times. I think there are circumstances where being passive it's a survival mechanism, or, you're not going to respond the same way to your boss about politics that you do to your parent, or that aggression may feel necessary as a survival tactic to protect yourself or protect someone. It's when we go to those two extremes and we live in them that ends up causing a dangerous pattern and unhealthy relationships in the long term.
Hugely important point. Yeah, hugely important point. And I like the way you put it, Kelsey. When that's where we decide to live, when that becomes the habit instead of, I think we need to adapt our conversation styles, especially when it comes to, conflict resolution and working through our differences with people. I think we need to adapt our communication style with people. I mean, some people are just going to respond better and share more with somebody who's a little more passive. Somebody's, and yes, there are going to be times when when that survival instinct of being aggressive or a little more aggressive is going to be important. But living there in either one of those spaces, I think, is problematic. And I think it's also a skill, Kelsey, to start to learn as a communicator where to be and what people are going to respond best to, and what people are going to feel the most comfortable in sharing with, or what kind of communication style and what kind of person they think you are as the receiver of the communication they're trying to put out there. I think it's very important that we learn to read people. A friend of mine named Jennifer Furlong, she would talk about the platinum rule. It's treat people as they wish to be treated. So I think when we start to think about our communication styles, I think what you're saying is absolutely right. You can't just live in one space. You can't just pigeonhole yourself to one style. Talk a little bit more about that for me.
The way that in the and way model, I use this all the time is people oftentimes identify themselves with the style that they're most comfortable with, or with the style that they think they're known for. So people saying things like, I'm a people pleaser, or, she's a jerk, or she's aggressive, just kind of labeling others and labeling ourselves. It pigeonholes us into that. That's the place we're living in. And the and way practice is being able to put a behavior and another behavior. Like, I've got these two competing impulses going on. So I'm an assertive person. And there are times that I get activated, I shut down, and I'm not even sure how to respond with this particular person in my family. Or I'm an assertive person, I'm a peacemaker. And there are times when I don't even catch a passive aggressive comment until later on. And then I'm, reeling about it and a little bummed that I missed out on an opportunity to communicate. Instead of just, I'm a people pleaser, it's, there's a part of me that wants to people please. I've done that plenty of times. And there's another part of me that's been practicing requesting, identifying what I want and working toward that. So trying to break down some of those labels that we've been put on ourselves into these competing impulses or these patterns that can ebb and flow instead of being fixed and stuck.
I mean, I just think there's some incredible things. I mean, the style that you're talking about, Kelsey, is just wonderful in terms of in how we communicate, especially how we communicate with people that we disagree with, and working through. And this looks to me just to be another incredible model of how people can learn how to communicate better across difference. I mean, one of the biggest things that we are missing in society today, at least in my opinion, is the ability to disagree effectively and work through our differences and have the right kind of dialogue. That I mean, one of the things that Braver Angels we're talking so much about today is courageous citizenship, and that's it takes a lot of courage to work through and convene, come together, solve problems together with people that we know we disagree with. So when we think about that, when we think about the whole idea of the kind of courage that it takes to engage across difference, Kelsey, what are the biggest, what are, say, the biggest one or two things that people are going to take away from this book, The And Way, and say, you know what, after I've read this book, I can do this thing. I can work across differences. I am going to use this tool and I am going to make a difference.
What I hope is that people will be able to see these courageous conversations and courageous interactions, even the courageous moment of looking at oneself with compassion, as opportunities for growth and as worth it because of the depth that you get in relationship, the peace that you get internally, that taking that uncomfortable step is going to be worth it because of the outcome that it provides on a societal level, on a relational, interpersonal level, and on an internal level. And I think that's a lot of times folks are not sure if they're ready to commit to that because they're not sure if that investment, it's a lot of time and energy to operate this way. It's not easy. And so I think that courage is the perfect word you're using to describe that. It's not a passive thing that just comes to be. I hope that people see that out of the discomfort comes growth. And then I hope that folks really practice being able to look at themselves as more than one thing, more than one label, and be able to look at other people with that same capacity. And the more that's practiced back and forth, and the more flexibility we're gaining, I think the more we'll be open to seeing each other as more than just a red or a blue, that there's somebody who's identifies this way politically. And I saw that time that they brought a casserole to the neighbor over there that was struggling. I have this family member that he seems so mean. Instead of being like, oh, he's just a jerk. Okay, he was a jerk over here. And then remember that other time he gave me an easy bake oven for Christmas? That was really, there are these complexities within each person, just like I can see that within myself. I sometimes have an impulse to be really judgmental, and I have the impulse to be really compassionate. I'm not one or the other.
No, that's absolutely right. That is such an important point, Kelsey. And yeah, we as human beings, we're very complex, and we are much more than those little snapshots in time that, that is a great thing. And I would love for people to take that away as well, because we are complex. We all deserve a little bit of grace, and we don't want to be judged by the worst moments, but there are a lot more moments that we can be judged by, and not only other people, but ourselves. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we have to have compassion for ourselves. We have to be thinking about, we don't want people to judge us by our worst moments, and we are not going to judge others by their worst moments. People have a lot more to offer than just those snapshots in time. Kelsey Blahnik, this has been a great conversation. I want people to make sure they check out the book, The And Way, Assertive Peacemaking in a Divided World. I got the book right here. I love it. They can find it at theandwaypress.com. Is that right?
That's right. You can also find me on Instagram at The And Way if you want to follow along as well.
I'm so grateful for you, Kelsey. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will do it again.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
Friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. We really are better together, so please take a moment to visit braverangels.org and consider joining the movement towards civic renewal and bridging our political divides. This is Wilk wrapping up for the week, saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make every day the day that you want it to be. With that, my friends, I'm going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.